Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor tonalist landscape painting. I have I'm not sure what fraction this sheet would be. One of my quarter sheets was a little torn on the edges and wouldn't successfully fit underneath a mat. So I cut it down to, I want to say it's 11 by 9, and I marked it 8 by 10. So we'll paint within those parameters. I just completely saturated my paper with water, and we'll just start getting to it. I think I'm going to do a very limited palette, most likely maybe 2 colors. Maybe we'll add a third in. And also painting on this size, we'll see how the cropping works with the video editor and if it's a nice size to work within. I am going to grab some burnt umber and I'm start creating my scene, using it to map it out. I'm going to have fun and just place everything around. If you hear any loud noises or crashes, we do have some thunderstorms in the vicinity. Fingers crossed the power does not go out. I sent a painting off on Etsy the other day, and I try to maintain communications with the buyers, so that's Hammy knocking it. So that, I want to make sure that they're happy with it, that it arrives safely, and if there's any suggestions they have. This is not working, Hammy. Just sit on my lap, bud. Sorry, guys. So I try to maintain communication through the shipping process and everything, just to make sure that the painting winds up there and that the customer is satisfied. The customer was happy with the paintings. However, I used the UPS shipping box, which is a triangular tube, and that tube apparently got squished. So he was able to get the dents and the creases out, but I'm not too happy that happened. So if you have any suggestions for alternative methods of shipping paintings, let me know down below in the comments. So I want people who purchase my paintings to be completely satisfied. I don't want to risk any chances of that. I also plan on revamping the Etsy page. I have a lot up there, but definitely a little backlogged, and there can be a lot more that I can show and present on there. So I'm just pushing around this burnt umber, seeing what type of scene I want to take place. If there's something that I don't like, or if I want to try something and I don't like it, I could use my paper towel and go back into it. I could also use the hake, which has plenty of water on it, to go right back in and re-moisturize that area. So if you use this technique, it's a lot of fun. You let the painting develop itself. I do find that individual painters, especially YouTube artists, will see a lot of the same compositions starting to take place. I'm not sure if it's a subconscious effort or if it just shows a repeated approach on that particular composition. There's some thunder right there. Tomorrow I have a farmer's market, so hopefully that goes well. I think we are looking at a high of 97 tomorrow. I think throughout most of the United States we've been having some high weather. And there is a gentleman that I have on Facebook who is in France. he had posted a picture and it was in Celsius. I did the conversion. I think some have like heat indexes of 105. I don't know if that's coming up soon in France or currently, but that was pretty scary. So I know some places in Europe don't even have AC. I'm curious if you know anything about that. Let me know in the comments below. This hake is almost officially 4 years old. It's got quite a bit of use out of it, but I have been getting a lot of shedding lately. So I'm just going back and forth between burnt umber and raw umber. I think I'm going to put some in the sky here, but dab back gradation. That thunder is good napping weather. With this two color combination, I often use the raw umber as a darker element. I believe I have a painting done with the two of them as my profile picture on Facebook. And I don't think I had filmed, I might have filmed that one, I'm not sure. But for some reason, whenever I look at it, I think of a story by H.P. Lovecraft. I've been listening to some audiobooks and podcasts. And the unfortunate thing is, if I listen to something while I'm painting or drawing, whenever I look at that drawing or painting, I'll always think about what I was listening to at that time. All right, so I think I'm happy with the layout of this composition. I'm now going to play with texture. I'm not going to do any dry offs yet. Paper towel to soften some of my potentially highlighted areas. I have this customized scraping tool that was made by a YouTube artist, Mr. Mark. If you look in the comments below, he usually comments, and we've been talking about him making a few and us just mailing them off to people who would like them. A lot of people use different tools for scraping. I originally used a lot of cut up credit cards. It worked really well. People use their fingernails for some scraping. You can use the back of your fingernail to go in like that. I often forget about that one. That's a pretty easy one to start putting some marks in real quick. Other people use palette knives. A big proponent of palette knife usage in watercolor was Zoltan Szabo. And in his books, I think a lot of them talk about how you can prep a palette knife for watercolor painting. The palette knife is going to have manufacturing oils on it, and it's going to want to resist holding the water on it. So you could remove those oils. I believe he might have used like a lemon or something like that in his book. But it seems similar to what they use with dip pens, where dip pens, the nibs will come with oils on them, and just simply stick that in a potato for a few minutes and I guess rinse it and dry it. And the potato will remove the manufacturing oils. Taking the #1 rigger and working around my scrapes, playing around with this kind of foreground ridge that I'm starting to create. We'll have this region here, slope down and recede back. With the wet and wet, anything you put into it, it's going to diffuse and soften. So it creates a nice underpainting. You can either leave it to that effect, or you can pass over it whenever we do a dry off. You could also wait till it dries before you put any of these for a different effect as well. So explore, play around, and just have fun. Let's see if we can start putting a little bit of foliage in. Being wet and wet, this is all going to diffuse as well. It gives us a little bit more concentrated areas. Grabbing some burnt raw umber with a darker underside. And with water elements, you can do that vertical stroke for reflections, but ultimately what really seems to help is just that horizontal push in that that aspect. That's done by Bob Ross in his oil painting videos. You'll see he'll first pull it down, and then from there he'll pull back up, left to right. And you'll see in a lot of oil paintings or watercolor paintings, if you look at the masters, if you see brush stroke or texture within water, typically it's horizontal, left to right, to create that flat plane. Here I'm just trying to build up my darks. The paint that I'm using is dried on the palette, so it's not fresh from the tube. Fresh from the tube probably would have been better at this point. But I will say the one potential negative about this approach and this technique is that if you're working from the tube, you may find that you use a lot of paint from the tube. That's just because you're using so much of it, you're just going back and forth. But if you're working with Cotman, Van Gogh brand, or the more cheaper, quote-unquote, student-grade brands, it's really not too much of a hit on the wallet. And it's really good not to be stingy or chintzy with the paint that you're using and that you're putting out. I experienced that recently with the Conte crayons and the Conte pencils. I was using them relatively blunted, and I was having trouble getting nice mark making with it. And I had looked up how to sharpen pencils using the knife, etc., and then sandpaper. And every time I do that, I have a tendency to break the lead or the pigment or whatever you want to call it inside that. So I wasn't really sharpening them that much, and I was babying them, and I was worried about wasting all that stuff sharpening them. That being said, I was being held back by doing that. So I started going in and sharpening them even if I felt like I was having issues. I hope that makes sense, because ultimately that led me to less babyifying my materials and utilizing them to the fullest of their capability. Using the flat side of the scraping tool. See what type of textures we can get in the tree with this. And once again, of course, we have the paper towel as well. There's one gentleman on Instagram who does a lot of plein air paintings with gouache, and he uses these really old, roughed up looking fan brushes. And he has an absolutely beautiful technique. He does get blocky shapes to it. And I was just thinking about that when I was scraping in this fashion, where if you prefer that look, that might be something you want to pursue and experiment with and see the blocky type shapes you can get. At this point, we can try to scrape out any whites. Let's see if we can pull it, yeah. With the scraping, something that I iterate and reiterate very often is that when it's really wet, you often get backfills. I mean, you get your darker scrapes like we did here in the beginning. As it's getting drier, or if you're using a wider scraping portion, you can get whites to come out. We saw that when I used my nail. It's so wide that we pull it out and get that white there. It will try to backfill some, but it does add interest to those areas. And let's see, I can't squiggle my nail. But it gives you a little bit more tonal variety. So let's pause this and we'll do a dry off and see how the tonal shift takes place and how everything lightens up. All right, we're relatively dry. There was some lightening that took place where it's softened up more. Some people might choose to leave the painting at this spot, and you can leave it like that. It has a whimsical, moody, atmospheric, ethereal, a lot of different words you can use to describe the painting at this point. If you choose to go further with it, you can then work on building up your tonal values, getting some more darks in some spots, while also playing with different types of textures that can now take place. So I do have relatively a lot of water on the Hake brush, so I'm going to pull some out. And I'm going to start stippling in more leaves. This helps create a sense of depth in that area where we have our softer and then we have our more texture in front of it. It is reminiscent of a conversation I was having with Joe Menza, I think it was last night, about Thomas Kincaid. He was pointing out that a lot of his trees would have the tree with texture in front of it, and then behind it kind of a small raised tree kind of surrounding that tree. Less texture in it, maybe tonally and chroma more muted, and we can get that feel doing this. So you could look at it as adding depth to the tree or adding depth to the scene. To give the idea that this right here that I completely covered with the brush, and then behind it recedes. I'm waiting for that one loud thunder that just makes me jump mid-video. Hasn't happened yet. I hadn't even bothered mowing the yard because it was been so dry. The grass really hasn't been growing, and I figured that mowing would probably have been detrimental to the grass. But after yesterday's rain and then today's rain, once it's dry, probably by Sunday, because I have a market tomorrow, I'll mow. All right, just building up my darks. And you can play with the rigger. I like the #1 rigger for its ability to just kind of go in and do nice expressive marks. You get a nice thin line from it. I do not enjoy the fact that I have to constantly recharge it with pigment. Sometimes I'll go with the #4 rigger, but unfortunately I'm not light-handed enough to get a nice thin point with it. But working in 8 by 10 essentially, I feel like the lines from the #4 would just be too much, unless I'm putting in really big trunks comparatively. So developing paintings in this fashion, it is a lot of fun. It really lets you relax. And frankly, it makes things a lot easier, especially just for me with, you'll hear a lot of artists recommend minimal palette, 1 blue, 1 yellow, 1 red, something like that, or maybe 2 blues, 2 yellows, and 2 reds, so that you spend more time doing the actual painting rather than trying to figure out and match color up. I mentioned that in a previous video, a recently previous video, and I think it was a gentleman that commented and said that he had difficulty with the high chroma, meaning, bright colors and lots of pigment painting style, and he was going to experiment with muted painting as well. It just gives a nice uniformity to it. It gives an old-fashioned feel to it. At this point, you probably know that I'm a huge fan of the painters of the 1800s and the early 1900s, the landscape painters. And also the two huge different ideas and approaches between the two. A book by Burge Harrison, 1909, I believe. He was a teacher and a proponent of the Tonalist movement. He was talking about different paint application, and I think for the most part just talking about oils. And he was talking about the great painters of the century right before him, but I believe he took a lot of issue with their underpaintings in brown and how eventually what they painted over would kind of eventually fade and let the brown show through. I think that's what it was. I haven't read Mr. Harrison in a while. But, that's a big divergence with paint application with oils from the old masters, where they would do the grisaille, the underpainting, and then they would paint over it in selected areas. I think a very similar thing happened in the history of watercolor as well. In the 1600s, 1700s, there was the topographical painting that was happening with watercolor. mean, I think it was mostly like ink or painted in grays, and then kind of selective color was added over it. It was more for mapping scenes or doing pictures of somebody's property. And then eventually, I guess the late 1700s is when watercolor was really coming into its own and really being explored. And from there, just started to take on aspects like oil paintings. And then you start getting all the people fussing and arguing in the 1800s what watercolor should be and how you should keep it separate from oils in your approach, etc., etc. I know I'm just rambling, but I'm just doing that while I'm just putting in my little trees and having fun. This one, like I said, 8x10 is what the finished painting would look like. I'm usually 11x14. So if you do the math, 8x10, 11x14, you have 4 more inches in the width, and you have 2 more inches in the height. No, 3 more. So 3 times 4, 12 square inches of space that I'm not having to paint on since I'm working on a smaller area. All right, let's do a pause. We'll do a dry off, and we'll see how it looks underneath the mat. I think I'm going to leave it at this, so we'll see how it looks. All right, I have a little mat next to me that I can lay over this. A few things to note. You can just play around with simply burnt umber, if you want to just use that as a monochromatic painting. You could probably just do it with raw umber and leave out the burnt umber. I know that your Van Dyke brown, if you have any of that, that works great as a single pigment painting. There's some others that we have experimented with as well that worked really well as single pigment painting. So if you like this, please like, subscribe, follow. I have tons of links down below if you'd like to support this channel, and it'd be greatly appreciated. I have some exclusive content up on the Patreon, but that's a great way to donate. I had mentioned the Etsy earlier, and I have stuff up there if you would like to purchase anything from me and support in that regard. And if you follow along, you are more than welcome to, and you're more than welcome to sign your own name. In fact, if you would like to sell anything you do when you follow one of my tutorials, you have my express permission to do so. I want you all to be successful, to have fun, and have money for art supplies. On that note, I hope you all have a great day, and I will talk to you all soon. Take care.